probably the second biggest game of conference championship weekend. Now, they're all big because obviously all 5 conferences have playoff implications going into the weekend. But you talk about a very interesting game in Las Vegas on Friday night. So it is, many of you are listening on Friday evening. It is the Pac-12 championship game as Oregon faces Washington. And what's interesting about this game, let me say this. I don't get a lot of stuff wrong. And certainly when it comes to like betting, I get plenty wrong. But usually I have a pretty good feel for what the line is, what the line will be, what the line should be. And so coming out of last weekend, when Oregon just throttled Oregon State and Washington barely survived once again, I kind of just assumed, like I thought it would be a pseudo hot take to say I think Oregon is the better team and will be favored. But when I say will be favored, I thought it would be like a 2.5 point spread. And I thought that would be sort of controversial because Washington beat Oregon head-to-head and Washington is undefeated. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw that Washington is a 9.5 point underdog in the DraftKings Sportsbook. Oregon, a 9.5 point favorite. The over-under set at 66.5. And when you look at this game, a couple things. I just find it interesting, the difference between the two teams since they played in October, okay? Washington wins, Oregon loses. But there's no doubt that since then, and it's reflected in the point spread, that Oregon has been the better team. I think you can argue over the last 5 weeks, like Oregon has been maybe the best team in college football outside, Georgia obviously certainly has the argument. But Oregon is right behind them in terms of just absolute domination of their opponents since they last played. Since these two teams played, I should say. The 5 games since they played, Oregon has won by 24, 36, 9 against USC, which is a little bit deceptive because they completely dominated that game. 44 against Cal, 29 against Utah, 14 against Washington State. So you look at the last 6 games, I think I said 5. The last 6 games, 14-point win, 29-point win, 44-point win, 9-point win that they controlled, 36-point win, 24-point win. They are playing as well as anybody in college football. And as I've said for weeks, I think you can argue right now, Oregon, are they the best team? I don't know. That'll get settled hopefully on the field. But I think you could argue they're the most complete team in this sport. Number 2 in total offense, top 15 total defense, number 2 in turnover margin. They take care of the football. They get after the quarterback. They turn you over. They do so many things well. And I can't think of one thing that they do really bad, although there is one thing that they do sort of bad that I want to get into momentarily. From the Washington perspective, I think it's interesting because I do think it's kind of crazy that a team that has not lost all year in a power conference, but on top of that, not only has not lost all year, but hasn't lost in about 19 games going back to last year, is a 9.5 point underdog in this game. And I think what it ultimately goes down to is that is the ultimate bulletin board material going into Vegas on Saturday. But I also think, listen, 9.5 feels like a lot to me. We'll get to it in a minute. But I do think it's sort of justified just based on the way that they've played the last few weeks. Again, Oregon has won 5 of their 6 games by double figures since the Washington win. Here are Washington's final scores. They beat Arizona State by 8. They beat Stanford by 9. They beat USC by 10, Utah by 7, Oregon State by 2, Washington State by 3. So in total, of the last 6 games that they have played, 4 have been 1-possession games. And oh, by the way, on top of that, the Stanford game, they trailed in the 4th quarter going in. And so you can understand how this is a 9.5 point spread. But the one thing that I will say about Washington, I'll give them credit for a few things. 1, they're 12-0. Just give them credit. They know how to win close games. That is something Oregon has not proven they can do. But 2, on top of that, what I will say, in games where the weather is not bad, they move the football. And like you look at 24 points last week against Washington State. Yeah, it was really bad weather in Seattle for the Apple Cup. 22 against Oregon State the other day. Yeah, that was in a driving rainstorm in Corvallis. The 15-point win, 15-7 win over Arizona State. That was a game that had terrible weather in Seattle. I watched that one from start to finish while I was hosting Fox Sports Radio. So you look at the games where they haven't been able to move the ball. Bad weather. Everything else, 42 against Stanford on a perfect night, 52 against USC on a perfect night, 35 against Utah in a game where the weather was not really a factor. So I believe they have ultimately been able to move the ball against everybody. And that is why, in my opinion, more than picking a side, I actually do like the over of 66.5 in this game. Now, that's a lot of points. I get that. But at the same time, there basically hasn't been a game all year where the weather hasn't been a factor that Oregon has scored less than 30 points. So I think even going up against that elite Oregon defense that they put up 36 points against, don't forget, if you get 21-28 from Washington, then guess what? You're going to hit that over because Oregon is going to be able to move the football. And so if we assume Oregon is going to win, and some believe by double figures in dominant fashion, now I can't do that. I can't bet the spread because I can't bet against the team that I have bet against. I bet against Washington a bunch of weeks. I bet against them against USC. I think I took USC to cover and maybe win outright. I took Oregon State to cover and win outright. I can't bet against Washington after what they've done. But what I do believe is when the weather has been good, they have been able to score. On top of that, it is worth noting Oregon's pass defense. If there's something that resembles a weakness for them, it is the pass defense, 47th nationally in pass defense. So Washington, I believe, will be able to move the ball. And then if you like Oregon, I think you kind of assume that they'll be able to move the ball too. Washington's defense is not very good. Washington's defense does not get very many stops. And remember, they've played a lot of games in the rain and in bad weather, and they are still a team that ranks 124th nationally in pass defense. They are a team that ranks 42nd in run defense. And so on a neutral field, you think Bo Nix and Oregon will be able to move that ball. I will say that I think Oregon wins. I'm not picking them. I'm not picking Washington to cover, but if I had to lean a cover, I would pick Washington to cover because they play close games. They are not afraid. The defense is opportunistic, but more than anything, I like that over. I think Oregon is going to be able to move the ball. Washington, in good weather, has been able to score pretty much 30-plus points in every game. I'll say Oregon wins 38-30. I'm not taking the cover, but I do like the over of 66.5.